Okay, we're going to talk about blade thickness and the holder usage on the Easy Sharp machine. And right now for the video I've got a Easy Sharp machine that is the older variant. This is a 2003 model, what they call a Super Pro Portable, and that just has a cover that comes with it for team use. This is built in 2003 in Stacy. They're currently made in Minneapolis. It's a good solid unit. What I found on the yellow ones is the older versions, the Z height from the table to the wheel here is a little bit lower. So if you get one without a holder, you got to be careful. If you try to get another holder, you want to make sure the holders matches the machines. The newer machines got a little bit higher Z height from the reference surface to the wheel. Now, for this part of this discussion here, hockey skates typically have thicknesses around 3 millimeters thickness here, very close to 3. And then figure skates over here typically have closer to 4 millimeters thickness. And this is just a gauge from Pro Sharp. You can just use a dial caliper. You can get a cheap one at Harbor Freight, whatever. 3.94. Goalie skates and figure skates typically have thick blades, 4 millimeters. Hockey skates have ones that are closer to 3. There's some old dance versions that were even down here, even narrower at one time. So what happens if you have your machine dialed in for figure skates and you want to put in a hockey skates, normally you don't use a fixture like this and you tilt it over. This adjustment on this type of machine is generally used for minor variations. You don't try to use this to go ahead and use this for a gross variation, because it's tilting along here. It's similar to the tangent finder from their competitor Wisoda, and this is tilting over like this. So this is generally, the fixture is set up at the factory to be, the Z height is on the money for the nominal skate blade. And if you do a lot of sharpening with hockey versus figures, normally what you do in a shop is you have one set up for hockey and another one set up for figures, because you don't want to mess around trying to adjust this. This is normally something you never fool with. And at the factory what they do is they go through and measure from the reference surface to the surface the blade connects up to over here, and they set it up so it's set up to the wheel what it needs to be, where the radius of curvature is cut, the max bulge here, which may not be exactly where the disc is, the center of the thickness because of tolerances, but it's about right there where my fingernail is. So what they do at the factory on any brand holder is they set up so the plate here, which the skate bears against, this is set up to be parallel to the reference surface. Now you can use an indicator and go from here and from here to here to be the same number with a scribe. And it's set up so that when you add half the thickness of the blade, it's going to go ahead and hit right here at the max bulge, so that when you're cutting, it's all jives, all lines up. And then this is used to where if you had a blade, instead of being, let's say, 3 millimeters is 3.1, this is used for minor variation. Now if you have figure skates, what you generally do is you try to get another fixture, and it's set to be, since the blade is thicker, if you put this on this fixture, it's going to sit up higher and then it's going to cut it wrong. And you're not going to be able to really get it in well by messing with this. In fact, you're going to tick off the next user of the fixture for hockey skates. So the proper thing to normally do is have two fixtures, one for figure, one for hockey. Unless you're a machinist and you've got a way to go set it up. This has got to be all parallel. Normally you never mess with any of this stuff. In fact, you may want to put some Glipdol or glue on there to make sure in a club situation nobody's messing with this thing. Have it booby trapped, whatever. But what happens, since you want it to hit the same spot here on the wheel, this has to actually be lower for the figure skate. So if you got a thicker blade, let's say you had something the thickness of a 2x4, it's got to drop down half the thickness, the difference. So if you have a 3mm blade and you go to 4, it's going to not drop down by half a millimeter, it's going to be half of the distance, quarter of a millimeter, 10 thousandths. Doesn't sound like much, but it can make a difference. And once these are all dialed in, you're generally good to go. One thing to be aware of, when you use a unit like this, with time the pad will wear along here on any model. Then you have a little bit of Z-height variation. And here's a foam pad that's on here, like this. And if you look what's happening when you turn this dial, it's pivoting about here. And so, exaggerated, this is going like this to like this, is what it's doing. So this will end up going down versus up to hit the center of the wheel. And got one set up for hockey, one set up for figures. This is the older one that's yellow. It's got a nice clear finish on it like this. And I think on the Easy Sharp machine you normally set up so the hockey is really going this way, the toe. And I should flop this figure skate over so it's the other way. You got to be very careful with the figure skate that when you're coming in you don't hit the toe pick here. It's probably even more critical on figures versus hockey. You want to keep this entire profile to be the same, and that means you want to go through and just lightly take cuts. And there's a propensity a lot of times to go through and grind this down too much here, and then it'll act like you're falling over backwards, which isn't good. From here to right here is a non-skatable zone in a figure skate, and what that means is that if you take a surface like this, here's a black edge blade, you put it on like this, so your region, say from here over to here, is non-skatable. And what happens is when you spin around, you're about spinning about right through here. And when this profile wears, the non-skatable zone tends to change, and then it can get to be where, to fix this, you either need to get a whole new set of blades, or this needs to be ground down, the toe pick, so that it's in the same place. And what typically happens over time is this haphazardless, this tends to get worn. Very common that somebody will tend to grind this down. And so a bench grinder, a bench sharpener like this can be used for figure skates. You just got to be darn careful you don't sit there and try to round the tail off, because when you first start you tend to go slower and you tend to sometimes burn off too much material here. Figure skate's a little bit more specialized. I think hockey players a little bit not aware as much, because this whole thing is rockered back and forth. Typically you have about a 9-foot radius through here, and then this is transitioning to even to be tighter radius along here. Another thing was when you put a set of skates on a holder, I believe what they did is that the holder is higher because some of these newer skates can be wider. So if you put this on here, just an unknown skate, what you don't want to have happen is have the skate touching on, let's say, that. You got to be very careful of that. So if it's doing like that, that means the skates might be bowled over. And it doesn't matter what type of holder you're using. You got to make sure, especially with little kids' skates, you got to make sure that the skate is not doing some screwy thing like this and being tilted. So when it's clamped, it's got a false reference, because this reference surface here needs to be such that the blade is squarely on like this. You don't want it to be canted like this and held in, and you get the false impression that it's okay, because once you start to cut, you're going to think the holder's off, and then somebody's going to get in here and fiddle with this, and it's going to get all screwed up. So one thing to make sure, again, is that you're not on any holder, any brand, you get an unknown skate, especially some of the weird skates that are more like a recreational skates, the ones that have an adjustable length, or they're kind of a combo figure. It's not like a figure, it's a figure that has a toe pick but not an aggressive one. A lot of those have got one that's kind of has an adjustment on it. And some of them kind of look like they actually have a hockey blade, but the boot almost looks like figure. There's a lot of recreational skates that are like that. And it may be kind of troublesome to try to figure how to get it in a holder. So be darn sure that you're not bias the thing up like this. Because then you'll have a false, it'll be falsely in the tool, and then when you go over here to grind, you're going to have some issues. You may draw the wrong conclusions what's going on. This particular blade here is a Coronation Ace by John Wilson. That's a really moderate, intermediate blade. And typically these will have about a 7/16 radius of hollow. It's all personal preference on there. And on figure skates here, there is like this has got an edge relief for the chrome. And then there's another type of blade you got to be careful. You probably won't see very often. This is a gold seal here. And a gold seal, this is side honed, which means this is actually narrow in the center than the edge. So if you put this in this type of holder, it's going to get screwed up because this is actually curved through here. This needs to be grabbed up here on the stanchions on this type of holder. And normally you don't try to do, you know, Olympic skates on a regular grinder like this, but it has to be held up here. If you do up in here, you're on a curved region and you're going to really have some issues. And I just kind of point that out because you might get a pair used and be wondering what the heck's going on. Gold Seal's like a $400 or $500 blade, big bucks blade. And sometimes there are some used skates on the market that have older boots that are heavier and things. And this, if you put a straight edge from here to here, there's a gap in there. So even if you put a bat gauge across here, blade angle tester on here, it's gonna this doesn't have a good reference surface. You've got to go ahead and use up on here in the flat section, not over here. This is actually thinner right here than over here. All these holders, if you got one type of skate, it all fits on here. Normally when you get it set up, you can do skates one after another, never do any fiddling. What typically happens, you get somebody in there and they'll fiddle with it. Let's say they put this in and it's goosed up like this because they've got hitting something, they've got it too far forward this way, too far forward this way. They get it up, they do some trial cuts, put a bat gauge on here, find it's wrong, and then they start screwing with the knob here and end up trying to fix their error and holding in the tooling right by adjusting the fixture. So that's kind of screwball. Now if you really want to be exotic, what you could do is put an indicator down in here that ties onto the seal. We'll know where the knob is. What I do on this one, I actually got kind of a mark on here so I kind of know where it is. So if I have to go ahead and move something like over to here, then I know where to put it back. And so I'll just have a cheat sheet and go through and keep track how many times I've gone around so I'm not chasing my tail. On the Easy Sharp machine, they normally have a little cabinet like this, and that's to put the tool holders in. This particular model's got a big 1/3 of a horsepower motor in there. Serial numbers on these things are like, that's the year made. So that's a 2003. These things are really beefy. They'll last a long time. Kind of bulletproof. We had another video we showed here cutting the diamond. Let me turn this on real quick. See what it sounds like. Some of the motors on these I've noticed have a thing that has a the start actually goes ahead and turns the wheel off a little bit quicker. Again, if you're doing some figure skates, be really careful what you're doing on there. Ideally, on any skate, you never want to change the profile, but by definition, you are cutting along here. And on used skates, a lot of times, this will actually be bent down. You could take one here that's a recreational skate here, and this tail has been turned down too much through here. This is one that was from a rink up north. Got a group of skates, and then this has been all ground down too much. That's okay for just a rental or something like that, but normally this radius through here, say from here on a figure skate all the way down, is the same radius. And then on a higher end figure skate from here to here there may be one radius, and then there's another one, and then this is the non-skatable zone, and there's the toe pick. So you normally do not have it like a hockey skate turned down. So a figure skater, they want to have this back here so they can lift up to stop, and if you grind this down, then you got to where they're going to lean back and may fall over. It gives them a kind of screws up their routine. So this is common, the error you see, and this is a figure skate that is a rec skate that was used for many years. Got a bunch of these, and this has been ground down a whole bunch. And to fix that, you'd have to grind all this all down over and over again, which typically you're going to just burn up a whole wheel. So normally you don't do that. Normally you put new blades on there. It's kind of a long video, but again, in another video I was explaining about the Z heights of the Easy Sharp machine about, I think, a year ago. And the yellow machine here, the older ones, all the ones that I've seen, the ones that were made in Stacy, which is south of Minneapolis, I think by the original inventor, Mr. Peterson, I think, they're all yellow. And the ones, 2 or 3 that I've seen over the years, the ones that are yellow, I've noticed that the Z height from here to the wheels is a little bit less than the one on the more modern machine that they sell today. So if you had one of these yellow machines and then you call Easy Sharp up and you want to buy a holder, don't assume it's going to work for a yellow machine. You probably go ahead and measure from the plate up here to where the wheel is and let them know, because so you'll get the right holder. And sometimes I've seen the holders like this. There's a plate about, I believe, like 3/8 of an inch or a ½ inch or some type of adapter that lifts it up. In fact, I've even seen a Wasota one that's like that. They had an Easy Sharp machine like this. The Wasota one's a little bit higher than this yellow one, which is the old model. Long video. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. A little bit thrown together, but just trying to show a lot of different things about skate sharpeners out there to the general public.